Hello everyone, this is Derringer2K8 and this is The Incredible Adventures of Van Helsing Final Cut, the review. The Incredible Adventures of Van Helsing Final Cut is developed and published by NeoCore games. For those unfamiliar with the Van Helsing games, this is an action-adventure RPG first and foremost. It is also a merging of the previous three Van Helsing games into one giant game with added content. I'm just going to reiterate, this is one massive game. So what is this game? It's an isometric action-adventure RPG. There's a long story mode and an even longer end game, as your ultimate goal is to search for the best loot in the game. It has the typical ARPG tropes going. It's a classic hack-and-slash game that's ultimately about the item hunt. So here are the classes that you can choose from. The Protector class is your basic melee tank class, but you can use magic and some limited ranged attacks as well. The Bounty Hunter is your typical bow/gun ranged DPS class. The Elementalist probably speaks for itself, your caster DPS class. The Umbralist is your rogue, but also has some limited access to magic as well. The Phlogistoneer is another DPS class, primarily ranged and primarily blowing things up. The Constructor is the pet class of the game. Now, when choosing a difficulty, it'll just tell you exactly what you get with each difficulty level. So, Casual, it'll tell you the enemies have the minus 40% health and minus 30% damage. Fate points I will get to in a bit. Now, if you scroll down, you have Inhuman Ordeal, which is essentially the torment levels that you would get from, say, Diablo 3. And as you can see, the enemies get quite buffed, but also you get a lot of buffs to your gold find, your XP, and your item find. Also, you need to be level 90, which I did not get a character to at the time of this review. And now we have the adventure map. This is essentially the end game, but you can do it at any time. You will see the entire world map, and there will be several adventures to do. They are randomly generated as well as randomly difficult. Each adventure can have up to 3 special conditions which affect the difficulty. As usual, higher the difficulty, the better the loot. If you have the fate points though, you can reroll all of the adventures if you don't like the ones that you have. You also have 5 daily quests that you can complete. These are things to do as you play, they are not actual missions that you go on. One example is killing 150 monsters without dying. These also generate fate points as you complete them. Spoils of Triumph are points that you gain as you complete missions. The higher the value, the better chance of finding items. When you get 20 points, your item find is tripled. But if you fail a mission, they reset back to 0. The menus are fairly self-explanatory, but I'll go over them quickly just to give you a basic idea. Challenges are completed as you play the game, and you get fate points for completing them. Fate points are points that you earn through challenges, adventure mode daily quests, and events. You can spend them to open chests in your secret lair, upgrade top tier items, reroll the adventures on the adventure map, or reroll stats on Godlike, the top tier items. Inventory and character sheets are typical of the action-adventure genre and are entirely self-explanatory. There are a lot of skills to unlock, but there are more active buffs and passives. The skill tree is a circular grid reminiscent of Path of Exile, but not nearly as many nodes. Auras are passive buffs that you can unlock 3 of as you progress through the game. They are always passive. Perks are passives that unlock as you level your reputation. You level reputation by playing the game and completing quests in their respective areas. Glory, this is similar to Paragon points from Diablo 3. As you earn them, you can spend them on minor permanent buffs for your character. The map is just your typical overlay map as you run around. Achievements are exactly as you would expect. The journal, it keeps track of your quests and provides you information about the world of Van Helsing. The menu, it's your basic system menu. If this is your thing, then listen on, dear viewer. To start, I'll mention one very important part of the game, the protagonist's companion, a sharp-tongued ghost by the name of Katarina. She has more than a pretty transparent face though. She does it all. You can equip her gear, she levels up, she carries items, she helps you in combat, she has her own skill trees, and you can divine her behavior. If you want her to never attack and just be there to apply passive buffs, she can do that. If you want her to rush into combat and help you out, she'll do that too. She also has a very deep backstory that I will not go into though to avoid spoilers. As far as companions in games go, she's done really well. Next on the list are the graphics. This is a steampunk game and it shows. They captured the look and the feel quite well. You have clockwork machines and ugly twisted monsters on top of the werewolves and vampires. It all meshes together fantastically. I was able to play it with max settings at 60 frames per second on my 770 GTX with only 2 gigs of RAM on it. Which brings me to a point that I was unsure if I liked or if I didn't like it at the time. If you want to use the highest resolution textures, the game will download an additional 7 gigs for them. It'll actually say that when you choose the highest res. There'll be a little button that says download. Now, I appreciate that if I wasn't able to use them because I had a low-end PC, that it saves me bandwidth and time. On the other hand, the impatient must-have-the-best-now kid in me didn't like having to wait as I downloaded another 7 gigs. In the end though, I leaned towards liking the way it was done. If I couldn't use them, then I wasn't forced to download 7 gigs of useless files. I'm also sure people who have low bandwidth caps would appreciate this option as well. So, good job on giving us an option, NeoCore Games. On to the most important part of an ARPG, the combat. I felt that the combat was slower paced, and I liked it. I didn't feel like it was just rushing to the next area as I exploded enemies on my way. I felt that it was satisfying having to engage the enemies instead of plowing through them. Now, I will say that I didn't play in the highest difficulties, so it may be that way. But for as long as I played it, I enjoyed having to think about how to fight and live. And again, it could be that my gear is terrible. That's the reality of these games after all. One of the things that I didn't care for is the powering up of a skill before I use it. As you unlock skills, you can unlock a power-up to a skill you already have. I have one skill that shoots a shockwave in a straight line. I can upgrade it to have a power that increases the width of the attack. The issue I had is that I had to actively buff the skill with that power. I could buff it if my protector had enough rage. It felt awkward to have to click the button and even stranger still to manage the hotkeys for it. I eventually managed to get used to it, but I never got away from the awkwardness of it. At the end, the combat is satisfying, and as usual, my melee character learned to kite really quickly to survive. Which brings me to a point that I really enjoyed. There are monsters that have large weapons and will smash them down in front of them. You can dodge them and weave in and out to kill them. I realize other ARPGs will let you do this, but I felt that it mattered more in this game when getting hit. I play other ARPGs, and unless I'm already low on health, I just power through it all. In Van Helsing, I didn't feel that I could do that and live long. I'm okay with that. One thing that divides people in games is monster scaling. In Van Helsing, monsters always scale to your level. I generally don't have a problem with this, but I could see it actually being an issue on the highest difficulties. If someone is having trouble killing monsters because their gear is too low level compared to their actual level, they may have to lower the difficulty until they get more gear, which is backwards because it's harder to get gear on lower difficulties. I'll have to wait and see until I get to the highest difficulties to know for sure though. Overall, despite my issue with the powering up of skills that I mentioned, I really enjoyed the combat. Now onto some issues that I had with the game. These are mainly technical issues though, and didn't really impact the game much at all. The first is when you start up the game, the load time is incredibly long. Now, I didn't have this on my SSD at the time, but it really wasn't that much faster when I eventually put it on there. When you're actually in the game, loading between zones, teleporting back to town with a town portal, those were actually fine. It was the initial loading into the game and then loading up your save game for the first time. Going back and forth between the adventure map and the campaign mode, those are actually really fast. Another issue I had was when I was exiting the game, I ended up having to kill the task in Task Manager several times. It didn't happen every time, but it did happen many times. Another thing that always happened was, unless I had the game set to windowed or borderless windowed mode, it always crashed when I would Alt-Tab. That was something that I couldn't get around. Other than those 3 issues, I had no other problems. The game ran at a silky smooth 60 frames per second at 1080p with everything maxed out. There were no poor textures that I noticed, and if there were, they did not stand out. This game looks as good as it plays. And now that we have all of that out of the way, it's time for the definitive answer. If you like action RPG games, like Diablo and Path of Exile, definitely buy this game. And that wraps this review up. If you agree with me, or if you think I'm way off the mark, tell me in the comments. I want to know what you think. Thank you for watching, everybody. I am Derringer2K8.
Human Dexter from that. Ja, nog trouwens in les. Er gaat niet kast mee.